My earliest memory of my mother is the scent of her lavender perfume. I was 4 years old when she passed away, but that fragrance still haunts me, especially on quiet nights when I am alone in my room, trying to piece together the fragments of our short time together. My name is Letitia, and this is the story of how I lost two families and found myself. I don't remember much from the first few weeks after my mother's death. Most of the time, I stayed at my grandparents' house, a cozy two-story home with peeling shutters and a lush garden full of roses in every shade. Grandma Marta and Grandpa Arsenio did their best to shield me from the pain, keeping me busy with baking and their stories about the old days. The voices of the adults sounded muffled, as if through a thick veil, and I saw less and less of my father. He was busy with the funeral arrangements and some matters that seemed endless to me. A year passed, like something wrapped in a gray haze. My time was split between my father's house and my grandparents, but I remember one day noticing that Dad had become a shadow of himself. His smile had lost its warmth, and our conversations grew shorter. I often overheard the adults whispering in the kitchen, using strange words like move on, too soon, and a new chapter. These phrases slipped past me, leaving behind a sense of uneasy confusion. One evening, when I was 5 years old, my father brought home news that turned my world upside down. I was sitting on our worn-out sofa in the living room, looking at some drawings I had just made with colored pencils. My little legs barely reached the edge of the seat when he entered with a woman I had seen only a couple of times before. She had long chestnut hair and a smile that seemed to hide something deep in her eyes. "Letitia, sweetie," my father said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that seemed fake even to me at such a young age. "This is Linda. We got married last weekend, and she will be your new mom." My eyes dropped to Linda's belly, round and noticeable beneath her light floral dress. My father, as if following my gaze, added, "And soon you'll have a little sister. Isn't that great?" The word "great" hung in the air like an awkward pause. Linda stepped forward and clasped her hands in front of her. "I know it's hard to accept, Letitia," she said with a softness that somehow seemed rehearsed, "but I promise we'll make it work. We will be a family." I nodded, though I felt nothing but emptiness. That evening, I returned to my room and took out the only photo of my mother, the one where she is holding me as a baby. We are both laughing in the picture, but I couldn't remember the sound of her laughter. I ran my finger over her face in the photo, trying to recall at least a shadow of that memory. Over time, the changes in our house became more and more noticeable. Dad, who used to spend weekends taking me to the park or reading me bedtime stories, now spent his time painting the nursery and attending prenatal classes with Linda. I tried not to notice, but every time he forgot about our promise to go on the carousel together, a little spark of resentment flared in my chest. Linda wasn't unkind, but her attention to me always felt temporary, as though she were fulfilling the role of a nanny rather than a mother. She drove me to school in her blue Honda, asked me about my day, but I could see her thoughts slipping away to something else as her hand instinctively rested on her round belly. One day after school, I asked, "Linda, can we have ice cream?" She smiled wearily. "Not today, sweetie. I need to rest, the baby is kicking too much." That "not today" became her constant answer. "Maybe later, another time," words that gradually took on a bitter taste. And then Bianca came. Her birth filled the house with the sweet scent of talc and soft cries. Bianca became the center of everything. I remember sitting in the corner, watching as Dad and Linda smiled while changing her diapers, and how they seemed to forget about me. Bianca took their attention, their time, and even those rare weekends that used to be just for me and Dad. The silence of my world was filled with the sounds of new life, the sounds that made me even more invisible. I remember the day Dad brought them home from the hospital. He was carrying the tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. His face was glowing with pride, a look I had never seen before, not even in pictures where he held me as a baby. "Letitia, meet your little sister Bianca," he said, his voice trembling with wonder. I stood on tiptoe to peek at the baby's face, flushed and wrinkled, as though she had just returned from a long journey. "Hi, Bianca," I whispered, trying to sound like the responsible older sister I was supposed to be. But inside me, a strange, heavy feeling began to bloom, as if I was slowly becoming invisible. With Bianca's arrival, everything changed in the house. New roles, new routines emerged. The whole schedule now revolved around her tiny life. Letitia, please don't run around the house. Bianca is sleeping. Letitia, help me fold the clothes while I feed Bianca. Not so loud, sweetie, you'll wake your sister. I started walking on tiptoe around my own house, as if afraid to disturb this new, fragile order. My days became filled with new responsibilities: washing bottles, folding tiny clothes, picking up toys that were never mine. My privileges shrank just as the attention given to me diminished. One day, I came home from school and found Dad and Linda laughing as Bianca poked her finger at a tablet. "Look how smart she is," Linda exclaimed with admiration. "She's going to be a genius." I looked at my old, worn-out sneakers and remembered how Dad had said we couldn't afford new ones that month. Meanwhile, Bianca, who could barely walk, already had everything one could imagine: educational toys, expensive clothes, a room full of sparkling new things. The pattern continued. While Bianca got the best designer clothes, I received shirts and jeans that had long since lost their appearance, passed down from cousins. I still treasured the teddy bear my mother gave me for Christmas. Now it was missing one eye, and its paw was patched with several clumsy stitches. It wouldn't be fair to say that Dad and Linda were cruel to me. They fed me, dressed me, and sent me to school. But it all seemed more like fulfilling obligations than showing love. There was no real closeness between us anymore. The only exception was when Grandma and Grandpa came to visit. That's when Dad suddenly remembered I existed, hurriedly offering to buy me new clothes or books. Those gestures were more for them than for me, as if he were trying to prove to them that he cared about me. I tried to be good. I kept my room tidy, studied, helped with Bianca. I thought that if I were obedient enough, helpful enough, they would finally remember that I was also their daughter. When Bianca started talking, I hoped that it would change our world. I imagined how we would share secrets, laugh at silly things, play together. I decorated my side of the room in honor of the day when she finally spoke meaningful phrases. "Do you want to play with my dolls?" I asked one day, smiling carefully. She looked at me with such a judging expression, one that seemed too adult for her chubby baby face. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I want your dollhouse." "But it's mine," I protested. "Grandma gave it to me for Christmas." Her face immediately crumpled in that familiar prelude to trouble. She ran straight to Dad and Linda, her tears falling so quickly that it seemed like she could summon them with a snap of her fingers. "Dad, Letitia doesn't want to share her toys," she wailed, throwing me a look full of resentment. "Letitia." Dad's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Stop being selfish and let your sister play." That was just the beginning. Bianca quickly learned that she could get anything she wanted simply by complaining. She started taking my art supplies, books, even my clothes. Whenever I tried to take something back, it always ended in the same scene: Bianca's tears, Linda's reproaches, Dad's loud voice. "Letitia, stop being mean. Bianca needs to share." But taking my things was only the warm-up. Bianca gradually took over everything: the space, the very air in the house. Bianca had a real talent for setting traps that got me into trouble. It all started with small things, like the time she deliberately spilled juice on her new dress and cried to her parents, saying I had pushed her. Dad shook his head, Linda sighed, and I was sent to my room to think about my behavior. It got worse. Bianca broke her tablet and claimed that I did it out of jealousy. That's not true. She's lying. I tried to explain. But my words hit a wall of misunderstanding. Dad just looked at me heavily, then uttered his usual phrase: "Letitia, go to your room." Each time, I felt more insignificant. My only refuge was my grandparents' house. They had a keen sense for Bianca's manipulations and weren't afraid to speak openly about it. You have to treat your daughters equally, Arsenio, Grandpa would say firmly during Sunday dinners. We do treat them equally, Linda would snap. It's just that Letitia is too difficult. She's always causing problems, fighting with Bianca, even though Bianca is such a sweet and well-behaved child. I sat at the table, mindlessly moving food from one side of my plate to the other. And Grandma, unable to hold it in anymore, would raise her voice. Open your eyes, Arsenio. Your sweet child is manipulating everyone in this house. You're raising a little thief and don't even see it. Mom, please, Dad tried to smooth things over. You're being unfair. Unfair? Grandpa interrupted, laughing a bitter laugh. What's unfair is watching you spoil one child while treating the other as if she doesn't exist. That's what's unfair. These conversations never led anywhere. Dad and Linda had already formed their picture. Bianca was the perfect youngest daughter, and I was the problem child. Nothing, not even obvious facts, could shake this illusion. The last year of school, which should have been full of dreams about college and plans for the future, turned into a time of anxiety for me. Instead of thinking about getting into college, I was agonizing over whether I'd even have a chance to get in at all. One evening, as I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, I overheard a whisper that made me stop in my tracks. Arsenio, this doesn't make sense. Linda's voice was quiet, but tense. The money for Letitia's education. We could use it for Bianca. She could go to that private school we talked about, and then to a better college. My heart beat so loudly that it seemed to drown out their conversation. They were talking about the money that had been saved from my education since the day I was born. I can't, Linda, Dad's voice sounded weak. I promised Sarah that Letitia would get an education. I promised her. Sarah died 14 years ago, Linda snapped. You can't let promises made to a dead woman control our lives forever. Bianca deserves a better education. There was a long silence before Dad spoke again. My parents will cut me off if I do that. You know how they feel about Letitia. My legs went weak. The only reason Dad was keeping his promise to my mother was out of fear of losing money. Not because of love for me, not out of respect for her memory, just money. Fine, Linda finally said, sighing in annoyance. But I think it's ridiculous. We're spending so much on her when we could be putting that money into Bianca. I slipped back to my room, forgetting about the glass of water. My throat tightened so much that I could barely breathe. Graduation was approaching, and with it, the troubling uncertainty of what would come next. When graduation day finally came, it felt as if it were someone else's event. Dad and Linda were there, smiling for the photos, but their attention always drifted to Bianca. She was at the center of everything, even at the celebration that was supposed to be mine. Grandma and Grandpa, on the other hand, didn't hide their pride. After the ceremony, they gave me a book, a collection of poems I had loved since childhood. Inside, I found a note: "You are more than you think. Keep going." Those words kept me afloat on the days when I wanted to give up. But the tension only grew. Bianca became more demanding, her manipulations more sophisticated. Ahead of me were the most difficult decisions of my life, and I had to figure out how to find my own way in a world where I was hardly noticed. I was accepted into a graphic design program at a local college, which meant I could stay home and save money. Grandma and Grandpa surprised me on graduation night. They gave me a top-of-the-line laptop. "This is for all the heights you deserve, dear," Grandpa said, hugging me tightly. "You'll need it for your design work." I was on cloud 9. Now I finally had professional equipment for my studies, and my first steps into the world of graphic design seemed much closer. But my joy was soon dampened by one thing. The college was on the other side of town, and the commute was long. I hoped Dad would let me use his old Honda. After all, he now had a new car. One evening, I gathered my courage and approached him. "Dad, what's the best way to get to college?" I began, but he immediately interrupted. We can't afford another car, Letitia. The tuition is already taking all our resources. You'll have to take the bus. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. At least it's the bus, I thought, trying to convince myself it wasn't that bad. But 2 days later, as I walked past the living room, I overheard a conversation that made my heart tighten. I think a red Mercedes would be perfect for Bianca when she turns 16, Linda said with genuine enthusiasm. It's such a safe car for a new driver. Isn't that a bit expensive? Dad asked cautiously, though his voice carried a hidden smile. For our little princess? Linda laughed. We can start saving now, before she turns 16. I stood in the hallway, a bus pass in my hand, thinking about my hour-long commutes to classes in both directions, while they discussed buying a luxury car for a 14-year-old girl in 2 years. After that, life turned into a predictable routine, studying, bus rides, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible at home. Every day, I convinced myself that one day everything would change, that my hard work and patience would lead to a better future. But then came a phone call that changed everything. Letitia, Grandma's voice sounded tense. Could you come over this weekend? Your grandpa had some heart issues, and we need to discuss something with you. I arrived on Saturday. The familiar living room greeted me with the warmth of memories. It was here that I had found comfort in the darkest days of my childhood. Grandpa sat in his chair, looking pale but composed. Grandma was sitting next to him on the armrest, and they exchanged a look, as if deciding on something important. Letitia, dear, Grandma began, taking a deep breath. We need to tell you something. Grandpa continued. After the heart attack, I've been thinking a lot about the future. We're getting old, sweetheart, and keeping this house has become too much for us. We've decided to move to the Pine Grove retirement home. Tears streamed down my cheeks before I could stop them. But Grandma moved closer, hugged me, and held me tightly, smelling of lavender, which reminded me so much of my mother's perfume. They'll take good care of us there, she said softly. And you'll be able to visit us anytime. I'll come every weekend, I promise, I choked out through my tears. They laughed. That laughter warmed the entire room. You definitely won't, Grandpa stated firmly. You're young, you need to live your life. Spend time with your friends, maybe even date a good guy. But there was some hidden seriousness behind these words. Grandma gently stroked my hand, her gaze filled with warmth, but also with concern. Letitia, she continued, her voice softer, we also want to talk to you about our house. We've decided that it should go to you. I froze, stunned. Me? Yes, Grandpa replied. This place has always been your refuge. And we want it to remain your home. Grandma nodded. It's our gift to you, dear. For your future. I looked at them, feeling a mix of emotions, joy, sadness, and gratitude. So many changes lay ahead, but their support and love had become my anchor, something I had long lacked at home. Grandpa leaned forward in his chair, his face, though aged, as strong as always, but his eyes betrayed a strange worry. He looked at me, and I felt the tension in the room grow. Grandma, sitting beside him, quietly placed her hand on his. Everything had become so serious that I froze, trying to figure out what they were about to tell me. We need to tell you something else, Grandpa said, his voice calm but carrying a hidden weight. We spent about half of our savings to buy the house, he continued, not giving me a chance to ask questions. The rest will go to the family when we're gone. I tried to intervene, protesting, but Grandpa raised his hand, making me fall silent. His gaze was firm but gentle, as if he was waiting for me to understand and accept everything. But the house, he continued, as if he didn't notice my inner resistance. We've already taken care of it. We've registered it in your name, Letitia. This house is now yours. Everything is legal and official. I froze. It was like thunder on a clear day. My hands went cold, and the strange ringing in my ears started, as if I had just heard something I couldn't fully comprehend. The house, which had been our family's hearth, which held so many memories, was now mine. My head spun. I couldn't process it, couldn't understand that this was really happening. It was too much for my mind to grasp in a single moment. But Grandpa continued, not giving me time to react. "Does Dad know?" I asked, unable to hide the worry in my voice. Grandpa's expression grew slightly stern, and his face became more serious. "It's none of his business, Letitia. This was our home, and we decided to give it to you." I looked around at the familiar walls. They were the same as before, filled with the light of my childhood, my emotions, joy, and anxiety. The photographs capturing all generations of our family, the old sideboard, the corner where I hid while playing hide and seek, it was all here. This place, which had always served as my refuge, now felt both foreign and familiar, like memories I tried to forget, but which kept coming back over and over. "Why?" I whispered, unable to understand why all of this was happening now. "Why me?" Grandma smiled softly, her eyes full of love and kindness. "Because we're not blind, Letitia," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We see that you deserve this. We want you to have a home you can call your own. We want you to feel safe, without having to worry about where you'll live, about the future. We want you to be able to grow and create." I sat there, stunned, looking at these two people who had always been my fiercest supporters, who believed in me when everyone else looked the other way. And suddenly, as if I wasn't ready to hear something so serious, I realized that their support and care were changing. They were preparing me for independent life. This wasn't just a gift, it was a test, a step toward adulthood. "I won't tell them that," I whispered, instinctively understanding that this moment needed to remain a secret. My life was changing, but not all the changes made sense to me. Grandpa nodded approvingly, his gaze softening. "Good girl," he said. "What's done is done, and it's nobody's business." 2 days passed unnoticed as we helped Grandma and Grandpa move. It was a tough time. I was consumed by my confusion and couldn't find my place in the new house, in my new role. Yet, I decided I would support them, help with the move. On the day they handed Dad the keys to their old house, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Dad was happy but didn't know that those keys weren't really his. "Oh, this is wonderful," Linda exclaimed, already imagining how she would plan the renovation, redesigning the house to her taste. "No more renting. Finally, we'll have a real family home." And they started acting quickly. They wasted no time. They immediately began arranging everything to suit their needs. We moved into the house, and I silently watched as Linda walked through the rooms, frowning at the old furniture and the familiar decorations that held so many memories of my childhood. "This place needs a complete overhaul," she declared, running her finger along Grandma's old sideboard. "It needs a major cleaning, and then the girls can share the blue room upstairs. It's the only truly livable one." I felt a heaviness in my chest. I hated this place, this house, where I was now supposed to live, sharing it with Bianca. Bianca. We had always argued, and now it was even worse. She had become even more unbearable than before. As always, her shrill voice filled the space. "I'm not sharing a room with her," she screamed, stomping her foot on the wooden floor. "It's not fair. I deserve the master bedroom. Why should I be stuck with her? Make her sleep in the closet or the basement, or anywhere, I don't care." I stood there, clutching a box with my things, while Bianca's tantrum grew louder. The familiar headache that came with her scream started to throb behind my eyes. I hated this. I hated this house. I hated sharing anything with her. But I had long since learned that there was no point in arguing with her. I silently carried my box upstairs to the blue room, the same one where I had slept during weekends when I visited Grandma and Grandpa. I set my new laptop on the old desk by the window, placed a few books next to it, and then left for my classes, trying to lose myself in my studies, trying not to think about what awaited me at home. The whole bus ride to campus, I tried to focus on my upcoming design project. However, my thoughts stubbornly kept returning to what had happened with Bianca. My younger sister was getting worse with each year, if that was even possible. Her cruelty, her calculation, her deliberate meanness, all of it was intensifying every day. I didn't know what to do about it, how to cope. Her words and actions continued to echo in my head, refusing to let me be. The realization of what she was capable of was sometimes so painful that I felt something inside me break. When I returned home that evening, the house was quiet. I could hear Dad and Linda's voices coming from the kitchen, but Bianca was nowhere to be seen. I climbed the stairs, my steps sliding on the carpet runner Grandma had installed years ago when I was little. The moment I opened the door to our shared room, my world seemed to stop. My laptop was lying on the floor, my beautiful graduation gift from Grandma and Grandpa, my lifeline for my design work. I froze, unable to believe my eyes. The screen was cracked, completely beyond repair, the casing bent and broken. It was hopelessly ruined. And Bianca was sitting on her bed, satisfied, with a smirk on her face, watching me stand there, utterly bewildered. "What did you do?" My voice started as a whisper but then, unable to hold it back, erupted into a furious scream. "What did you do?" She didn't even look the slightest bit guilty. On the contrary, she continued calmly inspecting her perfectly manicured nails, as if what had just happened had nothing to do with her. "Oh," she said indifferently, "accidents happen, but come on, try to tell them. Who's going to believe you? We both know who they'll believe." I could barely hold back my tears, but the moment she leaned in and her voice dropped to a whisper, everything inside me shattered. "I did it on purpose," she said with such cold-blooded clarity that I felt something tighten in my chest. "And there's nothing you can do about it." As if by fate, everything I had bottled up, all the anger, all the pain, all those years of being ignored, underestimated, and emotionally abused, surged over me like an unstoppable wave. I couldn't hold in this volcano any longer. Before I even realized what I was doing, I lunged at Bianca. My eyes filled with tears of rage, and I saw nothing but her smirk, her heartlessness. "You spoiled, entitled little brat!" I screamed, grabbing her by the shoulders. My hand squeezed her so hard that she shrieked, pulling away in fear. We fell to the floor, and my fury erupted with such force that I felt something inside me snap. "Help! She's crazy! Help!" Bianca screamed, her voice not nearly as confident as usual. She wasn't trying to manipulate me anymore. Instead, she shrieked in fear, trying to escape the struggle. She was terrified of me, like never before. I couldn't stop. I kept screaming how she'd ruined my things, lied about me, built her life on my tears and suffering. My head was spinning, and all I could do was repeat the same things over and over. Dad and Linda burst into the room. Dad grabbed me and pulled me away from Bianca with force, while Linda immediately rushed to her daughter, hugging and soothing her as if I were some kind of wild threat. "Look," I said, pointing at my broken laptop, my voice trembling with nervousness. "Look at what she did. It was a graduation gift from Grandma and Grandpa. She destroyed it on purpose." She admitted it. Bianca's face instantly flushed with shame, but she quickly turned the situation around. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and, as if she had forgotten everything she had just said, she threw herself into Linda's arms. "It was an accident," she began crying. "I just bumped into the table. I didn't mean to do it." However, Linda didn't believe me. She was too attached to her daughter to see the truth, too blind to recognize that Bianca had always been a master of manipulation. "You're a horrible, awful girl," Linda shouted, her face twisted with fury. "How dare you attack my daughter, Arsenio? You don't deserve a place in this house. I want her to leave this house immediately." I felt the weight of hopelessness settle over me. This was so unfair. I was just trying to stand up for myself, to defend my dignity. But it seemed no one was listening. Bianca kept manipulating everyone, and I was left alone, consumed by my pain. "She's dangerous," Linda continued, not listening to me, her voice filled with rage. You have no right to treat our family this way. I stood there, stunned, with the feeling that the ground was slipping away from beneath me. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't stop this flood of emotions. I didn't know how I could keep living in this house. In a house where there was no room for me, where everyone was against me. I turned to Dad, desperately hoping that he would finally understand what Bianca had done, but his face was hard, as if I were a stranger to him. His eyes, once full of love and care, now looked at me with cold distance. I felt his gaze piercing through me, but finding nothing to move him. Pack your things, he said coldly. And leave. His words hit me like a physical blow. My world collapsed again, and I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Why? I whispered, but soon found my voice, full of pain and betrayal. Why did you always choose them? What happened to the father who loved me, who promised Mom he'd take care of me? His face reddened with anger, and I could hear his breathing quicken with fury. Don't you dare bring your mother into this. His voice cracked. You want to know the truth? You've been nothing but a burden since the moment she died. A constant reminder of a past I wanted to forget. Linda and Bianca are my real family now. You're just extra baggage we've been dragging along. His words were like a knife to the heart. I felt something inside me break once and for all. I was nothing more than a burden, a meaningless part of his life that he wanted to throw away. Everything I had meant to him, now erased. You have 1 hour to leave my house, he said, not even looking at me. He turned to leave, not allowing me to say anything in reply. At that moment, Bianca's self-satisfied voice rang out. She stood up, confidently walking to the bed, clearly enjoying the situation. Finally, she said, lifting her gaze to the room, her eyes shining with triumph. Now I'll have this room all to myself. I think pink walls would be nice, maybe a crystal chandelier. Linda, keeping pace, joined in, already planning the renovation as if she had just bought the house. We'll buy you new furniture, darling, she said, her voice sweet and penetrating, full of pride in her plans. Make this space truly yours. I stood in the middle of the room, unable to believe what was happening, listening to their conversation, which felt like a slap in the face. At the moment when their words confirmed what I already knew, that I was a stranger here, that I no longer belonged in this house, something inside me changed forever. I felt myself swallowing my words, trying to shrink, trying to become invisible to them, just to survive among their cold manipulations. But something shifted at that moment. My inner world, once held back and suppressed, ignited with fire. I straightened up, gathering all the strength I had left. Actually, this is not your house to renovate. My voice was clear and strong, like never before. The words burst out with such force that I didn't immediately realize how loud and resolute they sounded. The three of them turned toward me, their faces expressing confusion and surprise. Linda furrowed her brow, and Bianca looked at me with disdain, as if I were some alien creature, trying to figure out what I even meant. What are you talking about? Linda asked loudly, with a firm grip of authority in her voice. Are you planning to leave now? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the property documents that my grandparents had given me. This house was mine, and I was ready to prove it. My grandparents had transferred ownership of the house to me long before they moved to Pine Grove. It was their decision, and now it was time for me to make it known. If anyone was leaving, it was them. If anyone's leaving, it's you three, I said, feeling strength rise in my words, confidence filling me. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad snatched the documents from my hands, and his face turned pale as he read them. I saw his eyes quickly scanning the lines, trying to comprehend what was happening. This might be, is this legal? His voice trembled, and he clearly didn't know how to deal with it. Linda, she stammered, Arsenio, call your father right now. My father, struggling to stay composed, dialed Grandpa's number. I could see his hands trembling as he turned on the speakerphone, and soon heard Grandpa's calm, almost surprised voice. Dad, what does this mean? He asked, clearly stunned. You can't do this to us. Grandpa's voice became as hard as steel. How could you treat Letitia like this? All these years, we've watched you go from being a loving father to a spineless man who lets his wife and spoiled daughter trample over his own daughter. I felt the world around me tighten in that moment, and the sense that I wasn't alone, that there were people who saw the truth, gave me strength. Yes, we gave the house to Letitia, Grandpa continued, his voice resolute. We knew that the day would come when you would finally show your true face. Dad began to say something angrily, but Grandpa cut him off, his voice turning threatening. Choose your next words very carefully, son. One more disrespectful word, and you and your precious Bianca will lose your inheritance too. Your choice. I looked at the three stunned faces before me, Dad, Linda, and Bianca. They went from righteous anger to shocked silence. The minutes felt like an eternity until Linda, nervously swallowing, took a step back. Letitia, darling, she began, her voice sweet again, laced with insincerity, we were just upset because of the argument. We didn't mean anything by it. Of course, we don't want you to leave. We were just joking. That nauseatingly sweet tone she used when she tried to manipulate was back in her voice. But now, it didn't matter. I could hear my words bouncing off them like they were hitting walls. I have a very bad sense of humor, I said, barely holding back laughter. But, my dear, steadfast one, I will take everything you said at face value. You have 1 week to find a new place to live and leave. Those words from Dad sounded like a verdict, a heavy stone falling straight into my chest. They echoed in my ears as I stood at the threshold of what had once been home, but was now an alien territory. I tried to understand what was happening, but in my mind, like in a locked cage, there was only a dull despair and confusion. How could they? How could he? My father, who had once been everything to me, who promised to protect me from the whole world. Why had his love so easily drowned in those words, filled with contempt and coldness? I stood, listening to his voice, which now no longer resembled the warm, loving, familiar one. It had become metallic, lifeless, devoid of all humanity. I silently nodded, as though some important mechanism inside me had switched off, and I simply couldn't speak anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't show them. This was my final encounter with this house, and I decided I would leave with dignity, despite all the pain in my heart. I'll stay in a hostel this week, I said quietly, looking him in the eyes. Dad tried to say something, but I didn't listen. I had already made up my mind. This week might have been the time for me to rethink my life. And even though the pain hadn't passed yet, I couldn't allow myself to stay among people who were ready to turn their backs on me in an instant. Not for them. Not for their sake. And not for the sake of their comfort being more important than my dignity. Those few days in the hostel felt like an eternity, but every moment only confirmed that it was the right choice. The hostel was cold and uncomfortable, its walls soaked in the smell of cheap bedding and despair. But it was my refuge. A place where no one could betray me. And I could feel the world they had dragged me into crumbling. Maybe that was for the best. Dad, Linda, and Bianca tried to convince me to come back, and I knew they still wanted me to stay. But no matter what they said, no matter what they tried to do, I could never forget that moment when their true faces became clear to me. Their apologies were empty. Sometimes silence is stronger than words, and at some point, the three of them just fell silent. Silence was exactly what I needed at that moment. I wasn't going to speak, wasn't going to make excuses or listen to their pathetic justifications. I moved out. Packed my things, said my goodbyes to the house that had once been home but had now become a foreign place. My relationship with my father was over for good, and now I could only live my life. Fortunately, my grandparents hadn't changed their attitude toward me. They supported me, gave me shelter and comfort, just as they had when I was a child. In their home, I felt safe. We sat at the table, and I told them everything that had happened. The midday sun was shining outside, and their faces, filled with understanding, made me feel that I had made the right choice. You did the right thing, Grandpa said, not going into detail, but there was a sad light in his eyes, as if he knew this wasn't the end of the story, but only the beginning. But I hope that someday you will find a way to be a family again. I nodded silently, understanding that I wasn't ready to forgive them now, and maybe I never would be. I wasn't looking for excuses for what they had done. I didn't want to be part of that false family anymore. Only when I felt that I could stand on my own feet, when I gained confidence in myself, did I realize that I had made the right decision. I could start my life anew. Months passed, and I became more and more confident in my decision. I rented a small but cozy place near the campus. It was my own home, a place where there was no lie, no one who had betrayed me. I worked on myself, built up my portfolio, searched for internships, and my efforts started to bear fruit. I even managed to replace my broken laptop with a rental for the first month, and I could feel strength filling my hands. 3 months passed, and suddenly I received a call from Dad. He apologized, said that he was struggling, that he and his family were living in some cheap housing complex on the outskirts of town. He apologized again, and I could feel his words spreading in the air, like a weight, that now they needed my forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to turn everything back. Maybe someday. Maybe in the future. But right now, I didn't want to think about restoring old connections that had been crumbling for too long. It wasn't fair, and I wasn't meant to be their savior. Grandma and Grandpa listened quietly when I told them everything. But when I said that I didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive them, Grandma gently said, "It's fair, dear. Some wounds take a long time to heal." I nodded, looking out the window, where there was everything: light, shadow, emptiness, and a new path that I had chosen.